Welcome to the Critical Digital Education Research microcast. The Critical Educational Research Group, or CDER for short, is a group of researchers based at the University of Oxford who carry out research on education and technology from a critical yet always research-informed perspective. My name is Carlo Perrotta and I'm a member of CDER. More information about us can be found on the website of the University of Oxford's Department of Education. I'm here today with Maja Hojer Bruun. Maja is an anthropologist from Aarhus University in Denmark, and she convenes the interdisciplinary research program Future Technology, Culture and Learning Processes at the School of Education, the Danish School of Education, right, Maja? Based at Aarhus University. So it's lovely to have you here, Maja.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm a trained anthropologist from the University of Copenhagen, where I finished my PhD in 2012. And at that time, I had just moved to the other end of the country, to Aarhus, where I'm now. And I was looking for a job. And fortunately for me, the university just an hour north of Aarhus, Aalborg University, which is primarily an engineering university, had just launched a bachelor's and master's program in techno-anthropology, bringing together anthropologists, science and technology studies in different fields of engineering, conducted fieldwork among engineers and developers, for example, in the robot industry, and also looked at the different kinds of hopes and assumptions and cultures and forms of expertise that shape technological development. Currently, I lead a project, it's called Automated Expertise, AI and Algorithmic Systems as Interprofessional Work Practices, where I conduct ethnographic research in different domains in schools and hospitals where AI is introduced. These new AI tools do not differ so much from educational technologies that we already know and that kind of disembody and detach and decontextualize learning situations. There's a big difference between technologies that grow bottom up and that just arrive top down. And I think that is what we also saw when ChatGPT and similar AI chatbots were released, because these were not developed as educational technologies in any sense. They just arrived unregulatedly in schools and are used by students, of course also by teachers, without us knowing very much about the effects of this. So it's like, would a drug arrive in the same way without being tested at all?
There is an explosion of evidence, between inverted commas, about the impact of AI, generative AI in particular, on education, on learning. And questions are being raised about the quality of this evidence. And recently, we are having this conversation in May 2026, and I think last month there was a case, right, of retraction. Retraction is when a paper gets retracted, gets basically taken down from a journal because there are issues perhaps with the evidence. So this was a paper, a big literature review, a meta-analysis of studies that looked at the impact of generative AI on learning. And obviously this caused a bit of a controversy online. There was a lot of debate. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this particular problem? From your specific angle, from your point of view of as an anthropologist.
Okay, so I want to backtrack a little because just after OpenAI released ChatGPT and my colleagues and I found out that our own area of expertise is disrupted by this new technology. So teaching and learning and doing research in anthropology. We decided to do a review of literature that was out there in 23, 24 about ChatGPT and large language models in universities and higher education. We we actually did, for the first time in my life, I did a scoping review just to see the literature that was out there. And we ended with 140 or so different studies, and we studied them as cultural products, you can say, with our anthropological methods in a way. But we could really see a pattern there. What kind of studies were available when universities had to decide how to react to these new technologies. And these studies were primarily driven by technical and computer science interests. So they were interested in how to optimize the performance of different AI models. How can output come to resemble human-generated texts, for example? And they were very much about optimizing and then afterwards testing the effect of different AI models within discrete activities. So when we look at teaching and learning, activities were cut down into assessment, feedback, accuracy of the answer, and so on. So not a holistic understanding of what teaching and learning is, but breaking different activities down that can then be measured. And very little practice-based research about what teaching and learning actually is. What kind of phenomenon are these? Very technical thinking about teaching and learning with a lot of unfunded assumptions around routine work and how it can be optimized and so on. And what we also saw is that concepts from learning and pedagogy were used, but in very instrumentalized ways. So different kinds of models to assess teaching and learning, taxonomies like Bloom's taxonomy and so on, were used to somehow figure out some proxies, how the effectiveness of learning and teaching can be measured. Very reductive studies and very far from the work practices of teachers and students, and especially in European countries and the Nordic countries where we were, where we actually do have much more holistic thinkings about teaching and learning and have worked in this area for decades. So we were very depressed to see that this was the evidence on which universities and schools based their decision to recommend the use for generative AI. When I then saw that this study was retracted, I was thinking, okay, finally. So what took them so long? And this was actually one of the most cited studies to justify the use of ChatGPT in classroom. So it was really used as evidence that ChatGPT works to increase student learning. The editor's note states that the article was retracted, and I quote, owing to concerns regarding discrepancies in the meta-analysis. These issues ultimately undermine the confidence the editor can place in the validity of the analysis and resulting conclusions. So this is about the validity of the study. And that can mean many different things, but the questions that we were raising when we did our literature review was exactly about whether these kinds of effect measurements and performance measurements are actually valid in the sense that they measure what they claim to measure. So in this case, high-order thinking. How can you measure high-order thinking? Is high-order thinking really something that a chatbot or any AI system can enable? My critique is much more radical than whether this study is right or wrong. For me, it is actually impossible to do these kinds of study, to measure high-order thinking. And it is also clear in most of these studies, of these performance studies and effect measurements, that there is no phenomenological understanding of, for example, what high-order thinking is, or of what learning is or teaching is. So there's no pausing and looking into the phenomena or the situation where somebody is learning something in particular. They're all like very generalized ideas about learning, as if this is a kind of mechanic process that you can break down into different activities that can then be individually optimized. So the whole image of what learning is completely detached from social life, embodied processes of learning, and so on. These studies don't look into bodies of literature that we already have on digital literacy or computer-supported cooperative learning or many different digital pedagogy. I mean, there's so many areas, research, domains of research, and we are both representatives of just two of these milieus where this kind of research has taken place for so long. And there's just no relationship between these kind of computer science studies of learning processes and then educational studies of learning and teaching. And when I saw that this study was retracted, it was so clear that lack of validity could also mean this. For me, that is the most important thing about validity, actually.
So Maja, that's been an extremely interesting conversation. Thank you very much.